As you can see, I am in my vehicle right now because I have scheduled myself in two places at once. And so I'm sharing from my vehicle, and then I'm going to drive on to another appointment this morning. But we've just prayed together. We've asked God to bless us, and now we are going to be able to learn a little bit more about John chapter 2 and see what it is that God has been saying. So now, as we've done in our recent past, going through the book of John, if you have anything to say, raise your digital hand, and I will do my best to respond to you as much as possible. Now, John chapter 2, verse 1, it says, the third day. Now, the third day what? Probably the third day after he had been calling his disciples, because we learned about already in chapter 1, there was the one day, and then they had the next day, and then the next day. So this would be the third day in concert with calling the disciples in chapter 1. This would be just right after he had come out of the wilderness, and he was now, remember, very weak from having been in the wilderness for 40 days without any food. So the third day, there was a marriage. And the marriage actually harkens back all the way to the book of Genesis. We know in Genesis chapter 2 is where God laid Adam to sleep and took from his side something that would be his wife. And it was like Christ. The picture of Adam was like Christ, and the bride was brought forth from his side, like what happened on the cross with the water and the blood. But you can also see beyond that, there's the Father represented by Adam, and then Christ came forth from the side as well. So you've got these three begettings, if you will, there in that story of the first marriage with Adam and Eve. Anyways, the third day there was a marriage in Cana. Now, Cana is actually, if you compare this Hebrew word, the Greek word, Cana, this place in Palestine, it's like, if I remember, it's a river or some kind of waterway. And so it's a beautiful place, most likely. There's a lot of green there, probably good flowers and everything. And Galilee, we know, is a place that has a lot of verdure as well, which is like the growth, the greens, the trees, the flowers, etc. So it was a pretty place, and that's likely why they chose to have a marriage ceremony there. Now, this marriage ceremony was something that contained the mother of Jesus. The mother of Jesus was in this marriage ceremony. She wasn't being married, but she was actually likely, and you'll see why later, she was likely one of the coordinators. And we'll see some hints there. In fact, you can see that she was a coordinator in the Desire of Ages, but showing it from the Bible sometimes can be a little more difficult, but you will see it in just a moment. The mother of Jesus was there. Now, she's mentioned as the mother. Now, that's really interesting because Jesus ultimately first was the Son of God. And as the Son of God, he was somebody who we know was born of the Father, and that was his first birth, if you will, his first being begotten. Well, then later he took and was brought forth from a woman, or a virgin in this case. Her name was Mary. And so that was his born again experience. That's why Jesus says, unless you be born again, you cannot see the kingdom of heaven. And part of that reason is because Jesus was putting himself into this human experience. Now, the one he was speaking to, which was Nicodemus, he had already been born once into the flesh, but Nicodemus needed to be born again by the Spirit. And so Christ was born of the Spirit and then born of the flesh. We are born of the flesh and then born of the Spirit. And really, that backwards action that we take compared to Christ's experience is what brings us into the same kind of existence that he had when he was here as a human. He was a human partaker of the divine nature. We are humans partaker of the divine nature. Now, what I mean by Christ partaking of the divine nature is that he would spend all night in prayer. He would study the Bible diligently. Why? Because he needed the grace from his Father, just like we need the grace from someone greater than ourselves as well. So he was actually partaking of the grace or the divine nature of his Father, just like we partake of the divine nature of Christ. Christ and the Father were compatible. They were both divine, you see. Now, in this human flesh experience, he needed to be able to bridge the gap between a fallen human, like Adam and everybody else, and the divine Father. So the divine Son that partook of humanity actually bridged the gap. Now we have the divine Son and the human Son all together in one, which is a mysterious combination that bridges the gap between the divine Father and the human you. And so now we have this connection, and that's where Christ is mentioned here as the Son of Mary. Now, Mary is the mother of Jesus, and that's what's first mentioned, and the reason why it's first mentioned is because Jesus is going to show himself here as not just the Son of Mary. He's going to show himself here as the Son of God, okay? So that's why it starts out with this marriage in Cana. And by the way, Mary, the mother of Jesus, was there, okay? So looking on further, it says the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called, many are called, but few are chosen. Why? Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. So now Jesus was already going to Galilee. You can see that, and I think it's in verse 43 of chapter 1. You'll have to look for yourself, but I'm pretty sure it's 43. In fact, I'm just going to open it up here and just look. John 1, verse 43. The day following, Jesus would go forth into Galilee, right? So the day following, which means the next day, of course, as we're reading in this next chapter, it's the third day. And so he was going into Galilee already. That's in chapter 1, verse 43. Well, what's happening here is 2 verse 2, Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage which was in Galilee. Now, I'm guessing with good reason, that God the Father, in his foreknowledge that the Bible says is God the Father's, God the Father told Jesus how? Through the ministering angels that ascend and descend upon that ladder that he just mentioned at the very last verse of chapter 1. And so God knew that Jesus needed to be in Cana of Galilee because there was going to be a marriage. And so God sent his angel to instruct his son, hey, you should go to Cana of Galilee. There's something there I want you to do. So Jesus decides, you know what, I'm going to go to Galilee. So he goes to Galilee, and there happens to be this marriage service there because God wants to demonstrate that he is the Father of his Son and will do all these amazing miracles in the eyes of his disciples so that they can trust in the Father through the Son. Okay, that's what's happening here. Notice, it says, Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, notice, it's not Mary, but it's the mother of Jesus. Okay, the mother of Jesus said unto him, Son, they have no wine. Now, wait a minute. Why? Why? Ask the question. Why is Mary, the mother of Jesus, telling him they have no wine? Well, I'm guessing because Mary knew that he cared about other people's needs. Okay? I believe that's true. But he also showed some very promising, future abilities, if you will. Mary wanted to see and understand for herself what he could and would do. She believed in her son. There was times where it was difficult. You know, there was a sword that would pierce through her own soul, we're told in the book of Luke, and that's what Gabriel had, I think it was Zechariah had said to her. I'm not sure, Zacharias rather. I don't remember. But what happens is she had been both encouraged and somewhat discouraged by the activities. Now, it sounds to me like I think it's First Spirit of Prophecy, I don't remember, maybe Spiritual Gifts, but it covers this idea of the wedding service in Cana of Galilee. And what happens is Mary, the mother of Jesus, had been mourning for 2 months. And it says that she had lost her husband just one paragraph, if I remember correctly, later. And it seems, if you put the two together, that Ellen White was trying to say that Mary had lost her husband while Christ was in the wilderness. Now, you would have to conclude that from that section, but it sure seems that's what's happening. So Mary was now without her husband. Whether it happened the last 2 months at this point or not, it doesn't matter, but she was without her husband, I'm quite sure. Jesus is never mentioned as being with Joseph, his earthly father, while he is through his 3.5 years. And so I'm just guessing that that's probably what happened. Anyways, we have the mother of Jesus that knows Jesus wants to help. She also knows, yes, thank you, Vern, Luke 2:35, a sword will pierce through your soul. He just quoted the verse there for us. And what we can see is that Jesus, after being in the wilderness, he had come forth different than he had been before. You see, Mary, the mother of Jesus, knew her son as very capable, very strong. I mean, he used his hands for a good portion of his 30 years, right? Probably since he was a very young child. He was likely playing with hammers that his dad had, Joseph, while he was there in the carpenter shop, and he was helping lift boards and, move different things and building yokes for oxen and carts and carriages and all that stuff that they would do. Well, trailers and whatever it is that you would make, houses, chairs. And so his hands were strong. I'm guessing his arms were strong. I'm guessing his back was strong. Jesus was probably a very strong man. But after 40 days of not eating, he didn't look the same way, okay? He didn't feel the same way. He didn't have the same kind of energy that he used to have. But there was a different demeanor about Jesus. You see, because when he came to this marriage in Cana of Galilee, he actually had several people following him, respectfully calling him master. Now that was unusual. Mary, the mother of Jesus, saw this, and she realized, having heard from the likes of John the Baptist and others that had heard him, that he was the Son of God, the Lamb of God. And so she was starting to have these hopes in her heart about this son that she knew had never done a single thing wrong. And she was wondering, what is it that he's going to do? And so she, going to him as someone who had been appointed to take over the necessities of the marriage service in Cana of Galilee, which is why she's the coordinator, she said to her son, "They have no wine." Now, so all of this stuff is the reason why she's talking to Jesus. Now, because what she could have done is she could have gone to the one that actually hired her to be the coordinator, the one that said, "Hey, we want to make sure everybody has enough wine." She could have gone to him and said, "Hey, we don't have enough wine," but she didn't. She went to her son. Why? Because she has this faith in her son that he will be expressly made known sometime, somewhere, as the divine Son of God. Because she already knew, having heard from Gabriel before, that the one that will be in her is Emmanuel. Okay? God with us. She knew these things. The Bible says she hid those things in her heart. And so she wasn't a fool in regard to what was happening with her son. Anyways, all this is going on in this little story here of the mother of Jesus. When they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said to Christ, "They have no wine." Now Jesus said unto her, very important, notice what happens, "Woman." Well, no, wait, what? Did he say mother? No, he didn't say mother. He said woman. Why did he say woman? I think it's because he was the divine Son of God, brought forth from the divine Father. And though he was brought forth from Mary as well, she was not divine. She was not the one he was any longer going to take instruction from, as he had before, as an obedient son of his earthly parents. I mean, you know the fifth commandment, right? Honor your father and mother, so that your days may be long upon the earth. It will be well with you. There's a blessing there. Well, what happens is, in this story, Jesus says, not mother. It did say already, the mother of Jesus was there, and the mother of Jesus said unto him, "They have no wine." He, instead saying mother, he said woman. I think he's putting her in her place, respectfully, of course. He didn't say this with an angry look. He said it with a smile. Woman, probably with a twinkle in his eye. And then he says, as we continue, "What have I to do with you?" Now that sounds very similar to what he had said before, about 18 years earlier. "Mine hour is not yet come." Now what I mean by this about 18 years earlier is that Jesus had been over with his father and mother at 12 years old in the book of Luke chapter 2, I believe it is, where they had left him thinking that he was with them. And, without even worrying about Christ and just thinking he's going to come because they're part of the family of heaven, they think that, he's of course going to follow them. No, they should be following him. And so what happened is they separated themselves from Christ unexpectedly, without purpose, but it happened. And they were worried and trying to find out, where is Christ? Where is Christ? And so it took them 3 days. Interestingly, 3 days. This is after the third day here. It's 3 days there. There's 3.5 years, or 3.5 days, if you will, prophetically. I mean, 3 days is a pretty interesting concept in the Bible. Anyways, 3 days it took them to find Christ. And finally, when they found him, what did he say? He said to them, "What have I to do with you?" Basically, he didn't say that really. What he said was, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know that I would be about my Father's business?" And so here in this verse, he's saying, "Mother, don't you know that I'm about my Father's business?" It's kind of the same thing. What have I to do with you? He didn't say mother, he said woman. And then he says, "My hour is not yet come." Shane, go ahead and share. What are your thoughts?
Cindy. Actually, it's me. Hi, Daniel.
Hello,
good morning.
Cindy.
Good morning, everybody. Blessings. I just wanted to say, I don't know if it was in Ellen White's writing that I read it, but somewhere where you were talking about that 3-day thing.
Yeah.
That when we take our eyes off of Christ for 3 days, or if it's I don't know what type of a sin is sin, but a slip up or whatever, or something that separates you from God, it always takes 3 days of prayer, like when you're seeking for prayer for something or anything like that, 3 days to find recognition with that again. You know what I mean? Like you're separating yourself. I don't know if it was, I think it was in Ellen White's writings, but it just struck me as kind of odd that, you said that about the 3-day thing, the whole 3 day, because I read that and it's, it really stuck with me.
Yes. That is interesting. And for me, it was experiential. When I was a brand new Christian, I was wanting to follow Christ, but I chose to sin. I knew it was wrong and I did it anyways. And I remember very, very clearly that I was distraught for 3 full days. And at the end of that third day, I read that story as a brand new Christian. I never really read it. But when I read the story and saw that it took 3 days for them to find Christ, I was like, whoa, because then I got it. I realized like, wow, it took me 3 days to find the Lord again.
Yeah.
So yeah, good stuff. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And so what's happening here is, and by the way, I didn't mean to not say this, but somebody wrote, Charlie put up that in Desire of Ages 145, death had separated her from Joseph. The past 2 months had been very sorrowful. For yes, that's where it says, not only in the Desire of Ages, but also in spiritual gifts as well. Thank you for sharing that. That makes it clear, doesn't it? So then Jesus said unto her, woman, not, mother. Here he's trying to separate himself from his earthly connection. Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. Now, how would he know that his hour was not yet come? Well, the reason, of course, would be is that he was a student of Bible prophecy. And as a result of knowing Bible prophecy, he knew that he had time here on this earth. According to Daniel chapter 9, he had 3.5 years. And so notice it says his mother. Notice the word mother again. So it's very clear the Bible is not using her name Mary. He's saying his mother saith unto the servants. Now, why would the mother speak with authority to the servants? Well, because she has been appointed as the coordinator of the wedding, right? Of this marriage service. His mother said unto the servants, whatsoever the one that paid you to be doing what you're doing as servants, nope, that's not what she said. She said, whatsoever he says unto you, do it. And so Mary knew from his words that he had not put her off so that she was offended. No. She actually gave him that twinkle of the eye situation like, I'm not listening to you anymore, dear mother. My hour is not yet come. Now, I'm taking over my life, if you will. I'm surrendering it to my Father in heaven. I'm not listening any longer to you as I have as a child. That was not disrespectful, but it was necessary. And Christ understood what he was saying. And I think the mother understood as well. That's why she said to the servants, the one whom she had been given charge over, listen to my son and do exactly what he says. Now, if she had felt offended by what Christ had said, I don't think she would have told the servants to do what Christ had said. I think she would have said, you know what, servants, you guys need to go find wine because Christ isn't doing what he said, what I've asked him to do. No, see, just reading the section here, even though in English that can sound a little rough, woman, what have I to do with you? Mine hour's not yet come. It wasn't like that. I think it was very, very respectful and thoughtful and kind, but also firm because Christ was putting down his divine authority here. Now there's a comment by Jonathan. Man had been treasuring up evidences that Jesus was the Son of God, the promised Savior of the world. Joseph was dead, and she had no one in whom to confide the cherished thoughts of her heart. She had fluctuated between hope and perplexing doubts, but always feeling more or less an assurance that her son was indeed the promised one. She had been very sorrowful for the past 2 months. Yes, this is the one here that I read earlier. For she had been separated from her son, who had ever been faithful and obedient to her wishes. The widowed mother, as it talked about Joseph was dead earlier in the previous chapter, had mourned over the sufferings that Jesus had endured in his loneliness. His messiahship had caused her deep sorrow as well as joy. Thank you for sharing that. Good one. He also had to reach the age of priesthood, if I'm not mistaken. This he would be very cognizant of. Oh, that's a good point. And so, yes, I think that was very true as well. So Jesus is now an older son. He has separated himself from his mother by calling her woman, respectfully but authoritatively. His mother said unto the servants, whatsoever he says unto you, do it. And the servants are like, what? But she was like, never mind, I'll tell you later. Just truly listen to his words. So there was set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. I understand that's about 9 gallons. Not everybody goes by gallons, but you can do the math in your own head because I missed that day in school. Anyways, it's about 9 gallons. So these are about 18 gallons apiece, maybe 27 gallons apiece. And there were set there 6 of them. Now, I like this thought. I don't know, this is something that, came to my head as I was sharing, and I like to think that, like the Bereans, I've been taught a little bit by the angels. There were set there 6 water pots of the stone. Okay, now 6, what is that? Well, think about this. You've got this idea that 6 is like the 6th day of creation, and that would have been when God had made Adam. Now, Adam was made up of the materials of this earth, just like that pot, that stone pot, was made of the materials of this earth. Adam was empty. This pot was empty. Well, Christ breathed into the nostrils the breath of life into Adam, and he became a living soul. And this pot needed something, which I think would be from Christ, of course, the living water. And that's why Christ commanded that living waters, he didn't say living water, but he commanded waters would be put into this pot. And so as a result of that, the life being given to Adam and the water being given to the stone, you have this beautiful experience in both of them. Also, Ellen White points out that the water represents the regeneration or the baptism experience of mankind, whereas the wine, being red, represents the blood and the cleansing. And we know that according to Jesus in the communion service, when at the end of his life he had held up the glass of wine and said, this represents my blood, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. So we know that the red wine could be the blood and also the waters for the cleansing of the baptism. And so Ellen White, again, is on point, just as we've seen so far in all of our activities in comparing the things that she has said. Now, Vern has said, this was the same clearly seen in Ezekiel. He began to prophesy in his 30th year on the 5th day of the 4th month. Hey, I like that. That's really good. Good point. Thank you for sharing. Now, going back here to the Bible, there were set there 6 water pots of stone, kind of like on the 6th day there was this empty water pot, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews. Now, I like to think that they were set there. Set where? In the shade, in a damp and dark place? No, probably not. If it's for purifying, they would be in the sunshine. And so I would imagine, I don't know all the details of the purifying of the Jews, but I would think that they are in the sunshine, and as a result of the sun shining upon the stones, they are being naturally purified by the elements of the air, okay, of the sunshine, of the wind, etc. So now they contain about 9 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." Now, why would Jesus say unto them? Well, because he likely was with his mother when he just said to her, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" That it was probably then that the woman said to, or the mother of Jesus, said to the servants, "Hey, whatsoever he saith unto you, do it." So now Jesus knows that he's part of this coordination service. And he says to the servants, "Fill the water pots with water." And it says they filled them up to the brim. Now listen, these servants probably had no idea, like Mary did, about Jesus. They probably heard the testimony of Jesus by that mother. They probably had heard some of the goings on in the, area about the baptism of Jesus and the Spirit of God coming down in the form of a dove of burnished gold, we're told in Youth's Instructor. We're also told that in the Desire of Ages and many other places. But you can see that John the Baptist had been preaching, this is the Lamb of God. People have been hearing about this, and it's likely that they were listening to the testimony of the mother of Jesus, and they chose by faith to listen to him. They probably didn't know all the details that she did. So this is like, accepting the message of one of the agents of God. Mary in this point, or in this case, being the agent of God. And so what we see here is that they filled these pots to the brim. And this would have been by faith, okay? And he said to them, okay, now draw out and bear to the governor of the feast, the one that actually is, in charge, the highest, if you will, the most important of the feast, and they bear it. So now listen, they have decided that they are going to listen to the words of Jesus, and they're going to take water that has been put into a pot and bring it to the guy who is literally paying their salaries, okay? The guy that's hired them, the one that is in charge of this whole thing. And so they did this by faith also. Do you think they might have been a little nervous at this point? I think they may have been. So when the ruler of the feast, the one that was really in charge, even over Mary, the mother of Jesus, when he had tasted the water that was made wine, that's amazing, the water that was made wine, and he had known not from whence it had come, but the servants which drew the water, they knew where it had come from. The governor of the feast called the bridegroom. You see, the bridegroom is not the governor. The bridegroom is not the one in charge. The bridegroom's not the one that has paid for everything. The bridegroom's not the one that is leader, if you will, over the servants. It's the governor. And we know who the bridegroom is. We know who the governor is. The governor would be the father. The bridegroom would be the son. And what happens is they're in council between them both. The governor speaks with the bridegroom. And I thought that was interesting. So he saith unto him, every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine. And when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. I'm actually going to see this chat real quick. And it says, he was not unknown to them from the age of 12 to 30. He of custom read in the house according to Luke 4:16. True, well said, good point, thank you. And so what we're saying here is that the governor has said something very interesting, in that when they had well drunk, then that which is worse, after they've taken the good wine, that which is worse is brought out. Now, what would he mean? Okay, so they didn't have refrigerators, they didn't have freezers, they didn't have styrofoam coolers with ice in them to be able to keep the juice fresh for several days. And these weddings, they actually did last several days. But what did happen is that normally when they would make fresh squeezed grape juice, or they would take raisins and they would actually, put water in them to then, make the raisins plump again, and then they would be able to squeeze them, etc., and get some of the juice out that way. But what you would have is, if they had fresh squeezed juice, in just a few days, it would absorb whatever it was that it was within. What I mean is this. If juice was put into the stone pots, if juice was put into some kind of clay pitcher, if juice was put into some kind of animal stomach, and what I mean is they would actually use animal stomachs, the bladders, that they would fill, and they would cap it off and use it to carry water. It's a very good, almost like a plastic bottle. It wouldn't last forever, more like a paper bottle, if you will, because it doesn't last as long as plastic. But if you have this fleshly or animal bladder, it would last for a good long time, especially if it was moist inside. Well, that's what Christ meant. These are called wineskins. Thank you very much, Lynn. And so what happens is, when you have that wineskin that is old, it will start to crack. And what happens, Jesus knew this. And so what he said is, if you put liquid into an old wineskin, instead, when it starts stretching, it'll crack and make the rent worse, and the water or wine will spill out, and it'll just ruin the whole thing. That's what Christ was meaning. They're actually bladders of animals, wineskins. So whatever the wine was in, it would absorb that which it was being contained in. Like, for example, if it was a few days in the stone, it would lose its flavor of sweetness, and it would partake of the flavor of the stone. If it was in clay, it would do the same thing. It would absorb the clay, the taste of the clay. If it was in wineskin, it would taste the bladder of the animal. It would absorb that same kind of taste. So it's worse, and it would start to ferment after too long. And the Jews wouldn't drink fermented wine, okay? So that which is worse is something that had been sitting around for a while. So what happens here is, men had already drunk the good stuff, what they thought was the good stuff, that which had been pressed right from the grape. The good wine was brought out now, which that means it had just been pressed. How that occurred, I have no idea, except I'm going to show you a verse. It's in Acts chapter 2, verse 22. You men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs. These miracles and wonders and signs are which God did by him in the midst of you, as you yourselves also know. So the miracles and wonders and signs, God did those things. And the Israelites themselves, they knew that. So God's the one that did the miracles, right? So now what happens is, this water turned to wine. It was considered good wine, according to the governor of the feast. And they have kept the good wine until now. Now, it says in verse 11, this is the beginning of the miracles that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. So we're going to stop there for now as far as going forward in this, but I want to look up just real quick in Galilee. I'm going to search for this word, and you're going to see that 72 times it comes up in the Bible. And I'm going to scroll down and find that in the book of, Matthew. I guess it's not very many times in the Old Testament. But here in Matthew, you're going to see it's quite a few times. You can go through and just study the word Galilee in the New Testament. Whoops, my bad. And you're going to see that it occurs quite a bit. And you're going to be able to know that Jesus did quite a bit of things in Galilee. He went into and out of Galilee. And I'm going to let you do that study on your own. But Galilee is an interesting place. And the reason being is Christ did a lot of miracles there. Well, I like to think of this story of John chapter 2 in that I'm like one of those pots. I want to be pure. I want to go through the purification, if you will, of the Jews. I want to be in the sunlight. I want to have all that filth that's taken from me by that sunlight. I want to be filled with the water of life. And when people taste and see from me that the Lord is good, they will be able to taste and see that the Lord is good. And so my experience, I really want to be like these stone pots. And I pray that God will give us the ability to do this, not only in thought, but in actual experience. I want to be transformed. I want to be a container with the divine spirit, if you will, so that others will be able to be blessed as well. So, Charlie, go ahead and speak up, if you will.
I'd like to ask about verse 10 when it says that in the beginning they set forth the good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. So how is it that if the first wine that they serve is fresh grape juice, how can it be that it made them become drunken? Because that word well drunk is the same Greek word as drunken. I checked the concordance just now.
Okay. Well, drunken means that you've drank a lot. It doesn't mean that you're drunken as necessarily as though you are inebriated. And so after they have well drunk, they've drunk a lot, that means of the good grape juice, then they bring out that which has been preserved since the beginning. Now that preserved stuff is what is worse. The preserved stuff has taken the taste of the stone or the clay or the animal stomachs, if you will, the wineskins that they have put the grape juice in. And as a result, that makes it worse. Now, I do not believe even for a moment that Christ threw a keg party for these people. I've been to many keg parties, and that is not what Christ would throw. To bring a bunch of alcohol, 6 containers, each of them having 9 gallons, or I'm sorry, about, let's say, 25 gallons each. 9 times 25, you can do that math. That's a lot of wine. Now, if it was alcoholic wine, if Christ would have done that, he would have been encouraging the debauchery, the cursing, the lust, the fornication, the adultery, the evil surmisings, the fights, the, lust and pornography and all that stuff that goes on at those parties. I don't believe for a minute he would have done that. So the Greek word for well drunk, to me, simply means they drank a lot, and they drank all that was provided for them. And so then you bring out the reserves that, because it's been staying around for a while, is made worse. Is that helpful?
Well, the Greek word was actually different, because I'm checking this verse, the word drunk is Matthew G3184, whereas drink is G4095, Pinot. So it's a completely different word.
Uh-huh. So are you saying then that you think that Christ would give them alcoholic wine, or is it possible that we don't understand the Greek at this point?
Probably the Greek word. I'm not a Greek scholar, so I'm not sure. But I do believe that Christ will not provide fermented wine. But I'm just trying to figure out how to explain to those that try to argue in that way.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I have a friend who's a Greek scholar. I'm not. I could certainly ask him about that, and I will do my best to reply. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. So, by a show of your digital hands, how many of you have been to a keg party and you don't believe Christ would throw that kind of party? Okay, so Michael, you're with me. Christy, Jose, the elder, Shane, Cindy. Yep. Robert concurs. This is, yeah. So we believe that Christ is a very moral, noble, spiritual person that people want to follow and not to exemplify in that way. So yeah, the wine was unfermented. Yes, I agree, Michael. Thank you. And I think it's pretty easy to show that. Like the Proverbs makes it clear, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and anybody who is deceived thereby is not wise. If Christ gave them alcoholic wine, he would have deceived them, and he would have proved himself not wise. But That's impossible. So anyways, any last thoughts on John chapter 2 and the marriage of Cana in Galilee?
Yeah, just as a good companion to what we've discussed, if you go to Desire of Ages, page 144 through 146, it gives a very good account and mentions most of the things we've discussed. Points out some really good points of what her expectations were already, because at this point in time, she had been separated him from 2 months of time. And so she hadn't seen them. His countenance was, as you said, haggard. All this is mentioned. It also goes back to mention the Oriental customs, and the manner in which he spoke to her was actually a manner of great respect, in the same context when he said, "Know you not, I must be about my Father's business." All that is in there. So it's a really good, condensed and comprehensive discussion of these verses in this chapter. That's Desire of Ages 144 through 145.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, I read that as well. It's good stuff. And it's amazing how you can see what she said in the Desire of Ages just right there in the Bible. And to me, that's exciting because you can see all those proofs and different thoughts. The wine at Cana not fermented. The Bible nowhere sanctions the use of intoxicating wine. The wine that Christ made from water at the marriage feast of Cana was the pure juice of the grape. This is the new wine found in the cluster, of which the scripture says, "Destroy it not, for a blessing is in it." Isaiah 65, verse 8. Go ahead, Jonathan, and then Vern.
One thing that I find interesting in, I think it's Deuteronomy, it says that the life is in the blood, right?
Yes, it's Leviticus. Go ahead.
So, Leviticus, thank you so much. And if you have living water, it represents living blood. If you have like fermented wine, it's like dead blood. It's
Right.
useless.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when you have a blood transfusion, you don't use dead blood. You use current living blood. So in my mind, I guess I'm making that association of his living blood, of his sacrifice, that is spilled for us livingly and not deadly.
Amen. Good point.
And from having had a knowledge of grapes and the pressing of them and storage of them and converting of them to wine, which prior to my Christian walk I did a lot of, in that kind of climate, it is impossible to present pure wine after 3 days. In other words, the provision of wine had to be fresh for it to be grape juice, because fermentation is a natural result of the pressing, because the yeasts are in the grape skin. Unless you add things like sulfates to stop the process, the best wine is always going to be that which is fresh pressed. So by the time 3 days into the wedding, they would have been hard pressed, no pun intended, to come up with anything of the quality that at the beginning it would have been made for the wedding, presented. And by the third day, though they ran out, it would also have been degrading by that time. It would not have been as good a quality. The fermentation process would have been well along and starting. And if you've ever tasted grape juice that is starting to ferment, it's got a yeasty taste to it. It's, as you said, stored. It's not of the greatest quality. The other thing that consciously has come to mind, having contemplated this a lot and always looking for more evidence of it, from the time of his age of 12 onward, he was called master for a reason. He was addressed as master right at the beginning of his walk because they were not ignorant of it. As Luke tells us in Luke 4:16, it was his custom to rise in the sanctuary on the Sabbath and read. I would like to think that what he did at 12 years of age didn't stop, but that at the gatherings of the men, now having bar mitzvah at age 12, at the gatherings, he would have spoken out and continued to mystify them till age 30. And I believe his character of kindness, which is brought out in Desire of Ages 144, his custom was to continually deal with people with favor all those years. They would not have been ignorant of this kind man and this teacher in the house of Israel, yet one who continued to separate himself from the scholarship of the sanctuary itself and bring forth fresh wine as far as the context of his speech continually. I believe he had a great influence by this time on the people just by his person before his calling forth at age 30 as a minister of the gospel.
And they still didn't listen to him. Yeah. Wow.
No, amazingly so. Absolutely amazingly so. I believe the evidence around them was uncontrovertible. It wasn't just the miracles. They knew this man to be of a very different sort, the same as they did with John. They didn't follow John without cause. John, I believe, had been breaking the bread of life and encouraging people to righteousness for a long time. They followed him in droves into the wilderness because they were hearing from him that which the leadership was not giving. Their messages were dry and without substance.
Right. Good points. Thank you. Yeah, I tell you, it's going to happen again, friends. They're not going to listen. We're going to share truth. We're going to be with pure and holy characters. We're going to have Christ in us, the hope of glory, and they're going to do the same thing. So that's not to scare anybody, but don't be caught by surprise, because it's really going to happen.